I will now be joined by Freddie McBride and the panelists for our session on Next Generation 112. For those of you who still don't know Freddie, he's our latest addition to the EENA team, and he's doing some crucial work with Cristina on technical matters. Please give him a warm welcome, and he will introduce the rest of the panel so I can finally get out of here.
Will go dark.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the introduction, Demetrius. My name is Freddie McBride. I'm EENA's Director for Digital Communications Policy and Regulation. It's nice to see you all in the flesh. I only actually got the opportunity to meet my colleagues for the first time in face-to-face on Monday morning, so it's nice to see we're getting back to some kind of normality. So I'd like to welcome you to this opening plenary panel discussion on implementing Next Generation 112. As many of you who have been attending EENA conferences over the last number of years will know, NG 112 is a subject that is very close to EENA's heart. In 2013, we published our long-term definition document on NG 112. And in the years since then, we've been working very hard with our stakeholders, particularly our partners in ETSI, to do interoperability testing with a view to accelerating the development of a technical standard for Next Generation 112. And that work culminated in the publication in December 2019 of a technical standard, or a technical specification from ETSI, for network-independent access to emergency services. It defined the architecture and the core components of that. And since we met in Dubrovnik 2.5 years ago, we're happy to report that we now have some implementation projects off the ground, and this is very promising. But I guess most of you know what NG 112 is, but just to give you a flavor for those who may not, what we're talking about here is we're talking about an architecture that's based on IP technology that is end-to-end, and when I say that, I mean from devices, services, and applications at the citizen side, right the way through public networks to the PSAPs at the other side, and that can carry any kind of an emergency communication, no matter what type of device, application, or service it originates on. The network can handle it, and it can handle contextual information like caller location, and the PSAP can handle it and process it quickly and get the information that's needed to emergency responders as well. So it's all about creating more effective emergency communications. So without further ado from me, I'd like to welcome our esteemed panel. First, we have Brian Fontes, who's Chief Executive Officer of the National Emergency Number Association in the US. You're very welcome, Brian, and thank you for making the long trip from the United States today. I hope the jet lag's not too bad. Our second panelist needs no introduction on this stage. Cristina Lumbreras is our Technical Director. She also chairs ETSI's Technical Committee on Emergency Telecommunications, and that's where a lot of the standardization work on NG 112 was done. And I should be clear and say that Cristina sits on the panel today wearing her ETSI hat. Third, we have Hänni, who is a senior engineer at OFCOM, the National Telecommunications Regulatory Authority in Switzerland. Switzerland are now in the beginning phase, if you like, on their NG 112 journey, and we hope to hear some insights from URS, both technical and regulatory, on where Switzerland is heading. And last but not least, Sorin Vasilca, who is the Deputy Director of the Special Telecommunications Service in Romania. Many of you will know, who are aware of NG 112, that Romania is really at the forefront of NG 112 implementation in Europe, and we hope to learn from the experiences of Romania on this panel discussion today. So Brian, you're nearest to me, so I'll start with you. I mentioned our standards and our long-term definition document, and our starting point for those was the EENA I3 standards, which of course were published, I would say, over a decade ago at this stage. And so maybe you could share with us how implementation of Next Generation 911 is going in terms of the rollout across the United States.
Thank you. What I'd like to do too, I believe our technical director, Brandon Abley, is in the audience, and crazy thing is with the lights I can't see. So I just wanted you to recognize who he is in case there are any questions during the breaks that you may have regarding the EENA I3 standard. The I3 standard is currently under review, and it's really to assess the process in developing the standard by the American National Standards Institute, ANSI. And so it's been a long process. It's iterative. We're now in Rev 3 of that standard, and it's getting there. And the multiples of thousands of hours over the time of developing the standard is recognized. Now, the important thing is implementing it. And the United States has its challenges, to say the least. There are somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 911 centers, depending if you count secondary centers, primary centers, and whether or not you count government 911 centers or not. So there's all of these centers out there. Several of them, many of them, if not all of them, operate autonomously. Some states do have state 911 coordinators, and that's more the norm now than it was just 5 years ago. And these coordinators are trying to implement plans for the state in deploying next generation 911 services. So that is also a challenge, because you're going to have the tug of war between the local 911 center and state authorities. And so that makes it all the more interesting and the more diverse. The challenge in all of this is there are several aspects of challenges. One, certainly to get the standards, and it's a family of standards, really. When we talk about next generation 911, it's standards associated with the core services, it's standards relating to the geospatial world, it's standards relating to the ability to interface with carriers and their standard internet protocol sessions, and to make sure that information can move from point A to point B so that it all moves seamlessly, smoothly, etc. And so there lies the rub. We do have the deployment of what I call near next generation 911, because there's some of the components with the carriers not providing the IP connectivity needed. And this is occurring, it's increasing over time. So when we take a look at the states, you'll see states like California, who's working on providing it statewide. We see states like Texas that will deploy it on a regional basis, in large part because of the size of the state. When you take a look at 911 centers in the United States, it's something like 73% of the 911 centers have 5 or less 911 professionals. So it's this whole collection, and trying to get everybody moving in the right direction, trying to get leadership at the federal, state, and local levels, trying to get funding at the local level, state level, and currently we have legislation, hopefully, that would provide funding to enable the rollout of next generation 911 nationwide. So we are in the process of deployment. We have a long ways to go yet. More standards work will need to be done, and we're engaged.
Very good. Well, continuing on the subject of standards, Cristina, I mean, there's a lot of work has been done on standardization, but I think Brian has alluded to some of the challenges there, that, you know, the standards. We've developed this technical specification within ETSI with the various stakeholders and partners, and of course it focuses very much on the PSAP domain. But of course, if you want to have IP end-to-end, without having fragmentation. And I suspect, Brian, that there's some fragmentation still in the United States with the approach that has been taken to roll out. Cristina, what standardization, further standardization needs do you think are needed? And perhaps even is there a need for legislation mandating standards?
So in Europe, we are, I think, a little bit behind the reality in the US. So we have this technical specification that was published already in December 2019. So, but it's very focused on the PSAP domain, as you said. And how this end-to-end goes from the device and to the SINet, and this part is still somehow missing. And there's a need to work on this from a standardization point of view. But from the ETSI point of view, the work stops there. So the ETSI doesn't follow up the implementation of the standards. So it's more listening or proactively doing standards on where we see that there are some gaps. And I wanted also to highlight the very good collaboration that we had with EENA in the transatlantic plaque test. So at ETSI we did already 4 events on plaque test on the interoperability of standards to see that everything worked well. And the last one was very interesting because we collaborated very well with EENA, and we confirmed that standards were working.
Yeah, well, that's good. The standards are working. There was one word you mentioned there, Cristina, and we'll get a bit technical now, but I think it's important. So within the technical specification that ETSI has defined, and indeed it's in the I3 standard as well, we talk about this ESINet, or the Emergency Services IP Network. And indeed, it's something that I think in the standard it defines it obviously as an IP network, but it could be a network of networks, you know. So when you draw a picture of it, it's a network, it's a cloud. But how you realize that behind the scenes, I think is something that we're struggling with in Europe. I know that, you know, we had an NG112 virtual event at the end of April, and we had various implementation projects presented, including from Sorin. But you know, our colleagues from France, they had a sort of a different implementation. I don't think it veers too much from the standard, but I think there is a concern out there that we need to be very clear about what this is. And I know URS in Switzerland, this is a question that you've been grappling with, because your PSAPs are IP enabled, but you're still grappling with how to deal with this idea of creating an ESINet that they're all connected to.
Yes, that's a problem. An NG112 network, IP-based network, consists of different components, and we do not have a strategy to implement it. We had a governmental assignment 2 years ago to improve the positioning accuracy of emergency calls. So that was could be regulated against our telecom providers. And historically, we have 45 different PSAPs in Switzerland within 26 independent cantons, which have different timelines to implement their system to their end system. But we have had historically, we committed one basic telecom provider of ours, 3 mobile network provider, to make available this positioning data on a central database, on a central location server. And that's what we are doing this. As you said, all the PSAPs are connected with an IP connectivity. That's done. But in between, we have heterogeneous networks. Still, 3G is there. Is not, and in between there are networks are based on old technology. So there is not a data pass between the device to the PSAPs. That is at the moment possible. So we use the modern, all standardized method to get the information from a central place, which is location by reference. If this is if the data or the positioning data which comes from different sources, like the network is able to determine the positioning of a device, or the device, it sends the positioning with a high accuracy to a central endpoint. So our basic provider will collect this data and make it available to the PSAPs. So every PSAP has it ready, but it has to. They will decide when they will get and fetch and use it in the more precise, in the more accuracy that this will be available, and we commit by regulation the provider to operate this system. But we cannot regulate the PSAP, so we only can work on the network and telecommunication infrastructure, and that's our idea to implement parts of this NG112 architecture.
Okay.
So this goes step by step, and
right. So when you talk about then what you're doing is it's this challenge we have in regulation. It's how far OFCOM can go, and not into the PSAP domain. But what you can do is sort of harmonize the approach to making the location available, so that the PSAPs can pull it from somewhere in the network, and this is the idea you talk about, location by reference. Thank you, Urs. And Sorin, we'll come back to the technical stuff, but we spoke before, and what I really liked about the approach in Romania is that you forget about the technology for a minute. We know what the technology can provide, but you talk about a paradigm shift, almost like a reorganization of how things are done in Romania. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
That's right. Good morning, distinguished panelists and distinguished audience. I'm very glad for this opportunity that Freddie given to us to present the next generation network that is in deployment now in Romania. We talk about one national system, not regional, not local. And I said that there is a change in the paradigm, because by this transition from the conventional, what exists today to handle the 112 calls, actually we switch from 41 PSAPs at the county levels. Administratively, Romania is split in 41 counties, to 3 national PSAPs working in HA in high availability, as with the role with being primary, secondary, backup, and the contingency. So we increase the quality of the services, and you may know that I had a presentation, and the presentation and slides in April, and thanks to EENA, you can get the information, detailed information about the implementation project of next generation 112 in our country. In brief, we signed the contract in September 2 years ago, and the implementation plan is 3 years, and we'll terminate the project and the contract in December next year. The project has 2 big phases, stages. One that cares, the first one, for installing the hardware, the software, the protocols, the gateways, everything related with the core of the next generation network. And then the second stage, actually it is the replication of physical installation of operators' consoles. We had some small delays in the implementation as challenges, introduced by the disruption of chipsets production and perturbation of the international freight system for transportation of goods. That is why on the Gantt chart, actually we overloaded some segments of the first stage with the second one, and shrink the Gantt chart in such a way to stay and to stay on track and to finish the project as was initially planned. There are many benefits from this transition from the conventional 112 static data, geolocalization, in fact, with real-time video services, with RTT, with new features. We increased and we have the chance to guarantee all over the country the same SLA to the citizens. So we, by next generation networking transition from 41 to 3 infrastructure of subs, actually will be ready to face a surge into the incoming calls due to the fact that the operators will be able, on the FIFO basis, to pick up the calls local, regional, or national. We faced many situations with surge increase due to tornadoes, extreme weather condition, very fast phenomenon, and the length and the queue is growing, and the insatisfaction of the people is growing. So by this system, we'll solve also this aspect. But from the perspective, not technical, from the perspective of citizen or callers to the 112, the main benefits reach the person with hearing and speaking disabilities. Why I say that? Because for the first time, you'll be able to get in our subs the video calls, video streaming, and we could frame more accurate that it is a scene of the police or a medical team scenario. So this discrimination with a high probability to be correct will be given in the first seconds once we got this call. It is also in the benefits of workload per operators, the balancing of traffic, and I think a big advantage to us is to have under our full control from edge to edge of the network, the core distribution and the access. So we are the operator for state telecommunication in Romania. So in terms of the connectivity, the access, the IP routing, the cybersecurity aspects, we are by law the one that provide these services in Romania. Okay. I would say that I really appreciate the efforts, the common efforts of us, of the STS and the ANCOM, that in Romania is the National Regulatory Agency, to define the standards and the obligation for the public operator in terms of trunks, line, the IP trunks, the call processing, the priorities inside the network, and so on. They fully support us in this process of the implementation, not only on the 112, but also on the reverse 112. So okay. there are many benefits, and if you allow, I'll take this opportunity to just to trigger the discussion during networking, to present my view on the next challenges after we put in operation the network. Do you agree?
Yes. Just before you go to that, though, what I would like to say is that you made a good point when you talked about the role of STS in Romania as being like a state telecommunications service. And when we talk about back to ETSI nets again and NG112 putting a lot of control into the PSAP domain, of course that has huge benefits. You talk about being agile to respond to fast-moving situations, which is very important, being able to answer calls in different, use the resource that might be idle in one PSAP when you need it, that type of thing. And of course, that's all great when you look at it from the advantages point of view, but of course, what is happening there is that PSAP takes on a role of, at the moment we have network operators that have a mission-critical culture. Their job is to keep networks up 24/7. And, in circuit switch networks, they deliver the calls to the door of the PSAP. And as this changes and we put more functionality using the IP technology into the PSAP domain, a challenge there is making sure that there is a mission-critical culture within the PSAP domain to be able to deal with that, because we are talking about it, I think Romania is probably a kind of a special case because you do have STS. STS has that mission-critical culture, but how do we? Some PSAPs are merely customers of telecoms networks, so this becomes a challenge. Brian, have you any thoughts on that?
A lot of thoughts on that. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. the real challenge is going to be in a next generation 911 world is to ensure that the 911 professional is in fact trained and qualified to be able to deal with the influx of information, data, if you will, and the ability to move and parse data as well. And it's going to take time. There was a forum a couple of years ago where the police were talking about looking at next generation 911 as it relates to police departments. And I was sitting next or between two chiefs of police, and both of them almost in concert said, this is going to significantly change our position descriptions, how we hire people, the qualifications that we will need to ensure that we have the right people in place. So I think that's going to be one of the sea changes that we see happen. I also think there'll be opportunities for the incumbent 911 professionals to learn, to improve, to understand the next generation 911 environment. So I think there's a lot of, when it's all said and done, it's human to human or data to data interaction via human intervention at some point. And everyone is going to have to learn to adapt and adjust and to be schooled and trained in that next generation world.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, I think all you have to do is go out to our exhibition area here and you'll see all of these different vendors with solutions, and everything is just more and more information. And of course, if you want to use that effectively for timely intervention, you need to be trained to do it. So yeah, that's a very good point. Before I come back to you, Sorin, and your challenges, okay, I just want to explore one subject, and that's legislation. So I'll give you a rest, Brian. We'll concentrate on this in a European context. Cristina, perhaps I could say this to you, but there are legislative changes coming. Well, we know for a fact that there was on Friday there was a roadmap for a delegated act published. Do you think that this, well, one, do you think it's necessary to, if you like, stimulate 112 deployment, or do you think it might happen on its own? What do you think?
I think it's needed to stimulate also the standardization part. So it's needed to push somehow all the stakeholders to speak together. So and see how this end-to-end works. And also on the legislation, there's a part on mandating standards to the standardization organizations that also pushes and to make things advance. So on the part on the implementation of the PSAPs, that's for sure that it's sometimes the evolution to new technologies we have seen from the history that it doesn't start if there's no pushing from the legislation. And it will be the same for other things like next generation eCall, and it's also very linked to next generation 112, as it could be a package of standards and technology solutions that work well together.
Very good. Yeah, I think so. If you look at when eCall, the last eCall framework put requirements and dates on all of the stakeholders to implement, and one of the things with NG112 is, you know, at the moment if we focus on the PSAP domain, and we discussed this yesterday with some of the PSAPs, a lot of PSAPs are still not getting, you know, SIP calls. So even if you have all of this capability and you invest in it in the PSAPs, you're not going to be able to use it until we start to get that from the network. So it's an important point. Staying on legislation for a second, Switzerland is a unique case, and as a regulator, I'm sure you have a view on legislation. Urs?
Sorry. Yeah, it's impossible because we have a heterogeneous environment which is not able to implement this ideal case of NG112, because there are different providers with different technologies, and I think that a problem is to have a migration path to make able an evolution to this NG112 architecture, which will be all IP. The data comes from the device to the PSAPs. The PSAPs can use it, and that it will be a usage, an important information to find someone in the case of positioning, which can save a life if the positioning is correct or is precise. So that's will short the time to react on an emergency case. And well, if this evolution once is done, then it will be, there is the requirements for people with hearing diseases. So this is a basic requirement which the politics comes to us and will require solution to regulate some solution. But I think then once the basic architecture is changed, and now we are in transition phase where the technologies in the networks will change. Once this is changed, then it will be easier to implement this case of applications.
Okay, thanks, Urs. Okay, Sorin, you're a patient man. Let's hear about the challenges, and then after that, we'll get some questions from the audience.
Thank you very much, sir. You know for sure that we consider EENA as the main vector of the image and promotion of the 112 all over the world. And in the same time, it is the best organization that makes the links between the voices of those in the trenches of 112 with the high political layer, with the European Commission, with the industry, with the academic area. And that is why my wish would be to increase your competencies, to open new business line. And I'm talking here about the certification and training of SAPS operator, to get them on common ground and to be able then to approach the disaster recovery and business continuity in between the member states. As you said, the EasyNet will be at the end the 27 interconnected networks, next generation network, and we have to put in value what we have today. Each country, each member state has a local domain for trans-European network. It is the best gateway to make the connection in between our SAPs once a new generation network grows in Europe. So we have to certify and to train SAP operator. I propose to you to run an acid test to the executive of EROS and SAP organization if one specific center for psychological support should be installed and operational in the near future, because today the operators in the SAP could hear just the screaming of the mom or a kid or something violent, but once we go to the images, we'll be more affected mentally, psychological, and we have to find a way together to build such a campus for these dispatchers and SAP operators, just for them to recover and to have the possibility 1 week, 2 weeks per year to discuss freely and to have sessions with psychologists just to stay in equilibrium and to be able to work at the highest potential. This is one. And maybe it is not about disturbing the terminal market, but maybe it is the time to put a label on the market terminal in Europe that from the perspective of readiness for next generation 112 and reverse 112, they are fully compliant or partly compliant. It is about building a test laboratory for this certification. We have this example in the Tetra radios. There are such laboratories where we certify to the police officers, for the firefighters, that this terminal is compliant with the standards of Tetra. So my opinion is that it's good to think about creation of such certification terminals laboratory.
Yep.
From the perspective of protecting the consumers.
Absolutely, Sorin. And yeah, I think you're getting into a point now that's really important. I think we'll cover it in other areas within the conference itself. Very quickly, have we any questions from the audience for our panelists, either on the technology, the legislation, operational aspects of NG112? No? We have somebody down there.
Stand. Just a question. I don't know if this is the panelist correct to answer, but what do you think is a maximum age for a call taker before retirement?
I'll put that one to you, Brian. Yeah, you brought up training, so I'm going to give that one to you.
I'm probably the wrong person to ask since I've certainly passed the age of retirement. But it's oftentimes will be dependent upon the requirements or laws or regulations within the municipality or within the state as to eligibility for retirement. I think the important thing is not so much the age of the individual, but the qualifications, the training, and the expertise that that individual brings to the job. So I don't necessarily affix an age with the position of a 911 professional.
I think in today's day and age as well, it might be politically incorrect to do that. So we'll veer away from that subject, but thank you very much for the question. We're out of time, but I just want to let you know that the NG112 theme runs right through the conference, and indeed we'll focus more into some of the technical areas, location, etc. So we have next generation eCall this afternoon, which is very closely related topic. Also, we have a session tomorrow in track 1, implementing NG112, where we'll hear country-specific implementation cases in North Macedonia, Switzerland, and Austria. We have location and next generation communications, which will be a really interesting session at 4:35 in track 1 tomorrow. And Brian's going to talk on Friday morning with his colleague Brandon about cybersecurity in total, but also within the context of NG911. So that just leaves it to me to thank the panelists. If you could give them a round of applause, please. To Brian Fontes, Cristina Lumbreras, Hänni, and Sorin Vasilca. And I'll hand you back to our president now. Thank you, Demetrius.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.